Welcome to my messy studio, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm an artist and an art professor. If you follow my channel, you know that I love fountain pens and frequently publish pen reviews and tutorials on how to draw with them. One of the reasons I love them so much is that they're not a one-size-fits-all drawing tool and can be customized to work to your exact preference. I already have a number of tutorials on how to switch out nibs, tweak feeds, create overfeeds, and in this video I'm going to show you a bunch of other neat ways to adjust and enhance your pen. Some of these are practical things that every fountain pen user should know how to do, and other things, well, are perhaps just stupid pen tricks. In all cases, however, they're too simple and quick to warrant their own tutorials, so I thought it would be a good idea to collect them all here in a single video. Let's get started. Before I begin, I should put in this disclaimer. Please only do these adjustments on inexpensive pens with steel nibs. While all of these hacks are relatively mild and safe, I don't want to hear from anyone that they ruined their emerald-encrusted Mont Visconti. Let's get started with some very simple nib adjustments. The first one is super useful: what to do when you have a pen that's writing too dry. This Jinhao 9019 is very dry writing, something common in Chinese pens. This is often caused by tines that are pressed too tight together. Fortunately for us, this is an easy remedy. There are a number of ways to do this, but to my mind, the safest and most effective is to flare the shoulders of the nib. Often this can be done with the nib still inside the pen, but it's easier to do with a loose nib, simply like this. So let's twist this out. Then we're going to take the nib by the shoulders and pull upward while pressing our thumbs in. So we're going to flare the shoulders out a little bit, give this a little bit of pressure, not too much. And then let's put it back and see how it writes. Okay, let me just make sure the converter is in place. Yeah, it is. Sometimes when you pull the nib out, the converter pops off. Okay, let's give this a shot. Hopefully this will result in a wetter writing experience. And yeah, you can see it writes considerably wetter. No trickery here. I'm not putting any more pressure than I was in the first stroke. Just make sure when you're doing this that you go a little bit at a time, test a pen, and then do more if needed. But chances are, with one attempt, the pen will already start writing a lot wetter. The operation to tighten the tines if the pen is writing too wet is a little riskier and involves crossing the tines over each other. So let's take the nib out of the pen one more time. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the tines, push it down, and cross it underneath the other one. So I push and cross it. Let's do the same thing with the other one. I'm going to push down and cross it underneath the other one a little bit. The risk here is that you're going to misalign the tines so that one tine is going to be higher than the other. But this is easily corrected so long as you have one of these little jewelry loops. So let's see if we've made this adjustment appropriately. Let's put the nib and feed back. Okay, I might need to remove the converter in order to do it first. Let's see. These pen demos are always a little tricky to do, to choreograph. Okay, let's put this back. And hopefully this operation will have made the pen write drier again. Let's see if we can push a little bit of ink down here. There we go. Okay, it's writing too dry right now. Okay, it's writing probably even more dryly than it was writing before. Again, this might cause nib misalignment, but so long as you have a loop, it's a fairly easy fix. As for fixing misaligned tines, I actually have some second-hand expert advice to hand down from some very experienced fountain pen restorers. Look at the tines under a jewelry loop first to determine what the misalignment actually is, and then always push the higher tine down to meet the lower one. Try to press in the center of the tine between the distance from the breather hole to the tip, so right about here. This puts less stress on the tines and decreases the risk that you'll end up springing them. As far as more complicated fixes, such as bent or twisted tines, or modifications, such as nib grinding or creating flex, I'll leave that for people qualified to do such things. But there is one very simple modification that I do often, and that is to make a nib write in reverse. Many pens are great reverse writers right out of the box, such as this Hongdian M1, which I reviewed recently. The advantage of reverse writing is that it puts down a line that's thinner than a line that's written regularly, like this, which is a fantastic tool for artists and also writers that adds tremendous versatility to a pen. However, in some pens, the reverse writing is either very scratchy or doesn't work at all. So let's try it with this Jinhao 9019. Okay, the regular writing is okay, a little bit dry. And then reverse writing doesn't work at all. In most cases, the reason why the pen refuses to reverse write is because of something called a baby's bottom. So this often occurs in faulty nibs, but if we look at the tines under the microscope, what often happens is this, where the tines are overly rounded, and as a result, the ink sits inside the tines and refuses to make contact with the paper. Now, in a well-tuned nib, in a well-functioning nib, there is no baby's bottom on the actual writing surface, so that there might be a little bit of curvature, but the ink makes contact with the paper. However, often there is a baby bottoms on top here, so when you flip the nib upside down and try to reverse write, it doesn't work. So the solution is to get rid of this baby's bottom, and the best way to do that is with one of these Micromeshes. This is a 2000 grit Micromesh, which I got at Goulet Pens. It's a relatively inexpensive thing, which is actually really useful for nib smoothing as well. But the idea here is to just use the pen while it's still inked and run a few figure eights across the surface like this until the pen starts reverse writing. Okay, you can see it's already doing a little bit better. It's not running quite so dry. Let's run a few more figure eights. Apply gentle pressure here. And okay, now we have not a great. This needs a little bit more modification, but we have a fairly decent reverse writing experience here. Let's do a few more. And our pen now reverse writes. But before I show you my next series of tricks, let me quickly tell you about my upcoming workshop called The Fundamentals of Crosshatching, the 6 Basic Strokes. This 3-hour online workshop, designed for the beginner and early intermediate level artist, will teach you simple, effective crosshatching methods that can be applied to a variety of subject matter, such as landscape, figure drawing, and urban sketching. I'm going to cover the 6 types of hatching strokes commonly used in crosshatching, show you 3 extremely useful exercises for developing your dexterity with a pen, and lastly demonstrate how to apply these various skills by doing a drawing of these deceptively simple geometric forms. And as a bonus, once the workshop is over, I'll give you the opportunity to submit your drawings for individual critique. If you're interested, please click on the link in the description section for more information. Another alteration you can make is not to the tip of the nib, but the back of the nib. In some pens, the feed and nib pull right out without effort, making switching nibs and cleaning the pen easy to do. However, in some pens, removing the nib and feed requires either rubber grip or worse, pliers. Such pens are much harder to clean thoroughly, especially if pliers are required, because you can risk damaging the delicate feeds. in such situations, if you can pull out the nib and feed from the housing, which again in this case requires a grip and a little bit of pressure, but if you sand the back of the nib a little bit, thinning out the material ever so slightly, it'll make the nib a little bit easier to pull out. So I'm going to use 1000 grit sandpaper here and give the back of the feed a little bit of sanding. If the filing is super slight, it'll make the nib and feed much easier to remove. So let's put it back and see how it works. And now hopefully, let's try it again. Okay, it pulls out. You want to do this just a little bit so that the performance of the pen is in no way affected. So now the nib and feed pull right out, even without the use of a grip. Let's put it back in the pen, and it'll work just like it did before. Now let's do some more drastic alterations, not to the nib, but to the feed. If after you tried relaxing the tines, the pen still writes dry, the next step is to widen the feed ink channel. That's what's happening with this Jinhao 82, which is very dry writing even after I relax the tines by flaring the shoulders. So let's pull the feed and nib out of the pen. Here the nib and feed are very tightly fitted into the housing. Hopefully I'm going to be able to remove it. Let's see. Okay, I removed the nib. Let's see if I can pull the feed out. Okay, here it is. Okay, and then I'm going to use either a razor blade or, in this case, an X-Acto knife to widen the ink channel. Instead of using the sharp part of the blade, I'm actually going to use the opposite part of the blade, which is going to scrape the feed channel. So let's see if I can see this. Okay, so I'm going to insert my X-Acto knife into the ink slot and start scraping little by little. I think it's better to use the blunt side, the back of the knife, as opposed to the sharp part, because really what you're doing is scraping away a little bit of plastic to widen the feed. Let's do it one more time. Let's see, we need to do it back here as well. Okay, that should be enough. Obviously, go little by little, test the pen to see if it writes wetter, and then if it needs more, you can always add more. The problem with this method, obviously, is that if you make the pen write too wet, it's impossible to make it write dry again. So let's stick everything back in, and let's see if we've managed to increase the ink flow in this pen, which before was so dry writing it made the pen unusable. Okay, let's see if we can get this pen going. And let's see. Okay, well, it does write a little bit wetter. That definitely helped. Again, you're going to have to trust me on this. I'm not putting any more pressure than I did with the first test. And it looks like the feed is a little bit misaligned. A little bit. Needs to be reset. But the pen does write wetter. So this is the trick to use if you need the pen to write wetter, and you're willing to commit to actually altering the feed. Again, go very slow, little by little, and don't do this to a feed that can't be easily replaced, of course. But that said, this is something I've done with a lot of different pens, and it works great. And particularly if you want to place a flex nib into a pen that uses a plastic feed like this one, this hack is often necessary to getting the pen to work right. Now let me show you a few tricks that'll give you more control over your drawing process. This first hack only works with piston filling pens, and for best control, clear demonstrators you can actually see the piston move, such as this TWSBI Eco. Sometimes you want a pen to write wetter, either because you need a heavier, juicier line, or you want to quickly fill an area with ink. So this is a fine nib, and these TWSBI pens are relatively dry writers. Now let's make the pen write wetter. What I'm going to do is give the piston knob about half a turn like this. That's going to push ink into the feed and make the pen write wetter. Before you write, I would give this a little shake to shake out any excess ink, and then let's see how the pen writes now. Much juicier. And if you want the pen to return to normal writing, you can just use a paper towel to dry it off a little. And it should be back to writing normally very, very quickly. Unfortunately, doing the opposite, drying off the nib and feed with a paper towel, will not work because the pen receives ink from the ink channel, which is under the nib, which we cannot access. But there is a way of making a pen write lighter, which is great when you need to put down subtle halftones in a drawing or just get smoother transitions. To get a lighter line, all you need to do is simply dip the nib in water. So I have some water here, dip the nib, dry it off with a paper towel a little bit, and then the pen should write with a lighter value. This works better in some pens than others, where the effect either lasts a long time or comes back to normal writing fairly quickly, depending on the flow of the pen. If the pen is taking a little too long to return to writing with undiluted ink, you can dry it off a little bit. Give it a good shake to push a little more ink into the feed, and it should come back to writing normally pretty quickly. Okay, so it's writing almost completely. There it goes. Back to a dark black line. This can also be done in the other direction. So for example, if I'm working with a gray ink, and I need a darker line, I can dip my pen into black ink, making the lines darker. Then I can wipe the ink off, give the pen a little shake, and it'll be back to writing with a lighter valued ink quickly. If I'm using a mid-valued ink, like the one in this pen, I'll be able to control the values in both directions. I can dip my pen in water to go lighter, for those very delicate transitions. Make the pen go back to normal very, very quickly. Okay, back to gray. And then, if I want to make it go darker, again, dip it in black ink. Make sure you shake out the pen onto a paper towel every single time you do this, and make it write dark again. And since we're talking about inks, while there are some very good waterproof inks available for fountain pens, they still don't perform quite as well as those shellac-based drawing inks that are commonly used with dip pens, being slower to dry and often leaving residue when you go over them with washes. There are a few pens that can be used with shellac-based waterproof ink, such as this unique Indiagraph pen, which has a little water reservoir in the cap to keep things moist, and this Boston safety pen made by Noodlers, which has a unique design that keeps the nib submerged in the ink reservoir, which can also be used with shellac-based drawing ink. Otherwise, putting shellac-based ink in a fountain pen is a terrific way to ruin it. However, I'm happy to report that I have a simple hack that allows you to use your favorite waterproof drawing ink in your fountain pen. First, this requires a pen with enough space in the cap, and preferably a pen that's clear so you can tell whether the nib is starting to dry out or not. Here's how this works. We're going to take this pen, and then we're going to use some scissors to cut out little patches of paper towel. I recommend a thick paper towel like this. These blue shop towels, which in the US are sold in auto supply and hardware stores. We're going to double it up a little bit. let's see, we need to cut this down just a touch. And to fit this round cap, we might want to trim off the corners. Then we're going to stuff this little pad into the cap. And then we're going to use a little bit of water to make it moist. Let's give it a couple of drops. Just enough to moisten the paper towels so it doesn't drip everywhere. So as far as the pen, I recommend something obviously easy to clean. Something like an eyedropper that doesn't have a built-in filling mechanism, something you can clog up if the shellac-based ink dries in the pen. And then ideally it's a pen that is easily disassemblable. So something with a housing unit is a little bit more difficult, preferably something with a friction fit nib and feed that just pops right out. This particular pen, I can't remember, it's a Moonman, I don't remember the design, does have a housing unit, but it's still fairly easy to clean because it's an eyedropper. So the other thing I recommend, if you have a O-ring, placing a little O-ring here at the base is going to make the pen seal up a little bit more effectively to keep things moist and to keep the ink from drying out. So let's give this a shot. Let's see how this works. Let's fill this with Speedball Super Black. So we can actually open it. All right, these inks are very strong, meaning that they dry really well. And let's eyedropper this pen. Close it up. And this might take a little bit of while to work. I'm going to speed this part up so that we're not sitting here waiting for the pen to write. Okay, now let's see how this works. And now you have a pen that writes with shellac-based drying ink. Again, the trick is to not let the pen dry out, because if it does, boy, are you going to have a hard time cleaning it. And then, besides having a little moistened pad in the cap that's going to keep things from drying out, I also recommend having a little spray bottle so that every time you're done with a drawing session, you give it a little spray down and seal up the pen. So long as you're using shellac-based ink, if it dries out, you can use rubbing alcohol to reconstitute it and get your pen working again. However, if you're using acrylic-based ink and it dries on you, then you're a little bit out of luck. You're going to have to scrub the pen down, and then you can still get it to work if you buy a new feed for it. But this is a very effective way to use shellac-based inks in just about any fountain pen that, again, is easy to clean and has enough space in the cap to accommodate a little bit of wet paper towel. And since we're still on the subject of inks, here is a simple hack for improving the ink capacity of your cartridge filling pens. One way of massively increasing the ink capacity of a pen is to turn it into an eyedropper. This requires two things in a pen. First, a solid plastic body that doesn't leak, and then absolutely no metal parts that can corrode. This unfortunately makes this Jinhao X159 incompatible for this conversion. So what do you do if I need to increase the ink capacity of this pen without using it as an eyedropper? The solution is to create what I call a super cartridge. This is actually fairly easy to do, and all it requires is one empty cartridge, a silicone ink sac, which I bought from vintagepens.com. This, I believe, is the 18.5 size, and then some silicone adhesive. Here's how this works. The first step is to determine how long to make the pen, to make the converter. So I'm going to plug in the cartridge, I'm going to line up the silicone sac, and then I'm going to see how much space I actually have. Okay, so I'm lining up like this, and it looks like I need to cut, just to be on the safe side, right about here. You want to leave a little bit of room so that it actually attaches to the cartridge, right? So I'm going to cut right about here. I've got some scissors. Okay, hopefully this cut is relatively straight, though it doesn't have to be. And then it'd be helpful to cut away the back of this cartridge. For that, I'm going to use an X-Acto knife. Let's do that. Take some of the silicone adhesive. Okay, here I have some adhesive, and I'm going to apply it to the cartridge along the sides. Make sure I have an even layer all the way around. There we go. And then I'm going to see if I can slip the ink sac over the cartridge. This part is a little bit tricky. Let's see if I can do it in one go. Okay, that took a little bit of effort, more than I wanted. Let's sneak this a little bit further up and make sure it's the correct length. Okay. Let's see, that should comfortably fit into the pen without any problems at all. Maybe just to be on the safe side, I'm going to push it in just a little bit. There we go. And you can actually, while this is still wet, insert it into the pen and make sure it has space. And then you really should wait about a day for this to fully set before you try inking it. But here I have a pre-made super cartridge for a slightly different pen. Let's fill it. Okay, here is a fully filled super cartridge. Let's insert it into my pen. Okay, there it goes. And now we have a supercharged Jinhao X159. Particularly useful, especially because I did that hack that made the pen wetter. Here is my Jinhao X159 now fitted with that super cartridge. This conversion is actually fairly durable. This is something that I've done several times with my Coeco Sports. This super cartridge is at least 2 years old, and it's as sturdy as it was when it was made. One thing I want to point out, though, is that not only does the pen barrel need to have a little bit of extra length to accommodate the super cartridge, but you also want to think about the width. Because when I tried to make a super cartridge for this Jinhao 82, this slight widening didn't fit into the pen barrel. So you want a little bit of play in the pen barrel. Choose a pen that's a little bit wider that will allow you to accommodate the width of the super cartridge. I hope you enjoyed this motley collection of tricks, and if you did, hit subscribe and stay tuned to more content like it. Thanks for watching, and see you back in my messy studio very soon. Bye for now.